Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me for another true crime deep dive. So I just wanted to give a few updates. I know it's been a while since I posted a video because I have been working on a lot of things. I'm still working on the Bonnie and Clyde series. The next part should be out soon. Also, I have heard the updates on the Suzanne Morphew case. I know Barry's been arrested. I've been following it closely since I did my video on her case last year. I was kind of just waiting for something substantial to come out. Now it has, and I will be making an update to that case within this next couple of days, hopefully, or maybe sooner. Derek and I are also covering the Kendrick Johnson case on Crime Weekly, our podcast, and I've been really wrapped up in that case, as well as the case that we're talking about today, which is the case of Pravin Verghese. And between Pravin's case and Kendrick's case, it's been really consuming most all of my time. And Pravin's case is just so horrible, so sad. There's so many twists and turns. I needed to do it justice. And just as a heads up, because I know lots of you like to know, this case will be in multiple parts, definitely 2, maybe 3. And the case that we're talking about today, Pravin's case, it's important for multiple reasons. And in the last several weeks, I've spent a lot of time talking to the people involved in it, and it's become a little personal for me. Pravin Verghese was a 19-year-old college student who was found dead in the woods on the east side of Carbondale, Illinois. After an autopsy, it was determined that Pravin had died from hypothermia. It was an accident. There was no foul play, and that there was, quote, absence of significant trauma, end quote. But that was not the full story, not even close. And an entire family and community drew themselves around Pravin to fight for the justice that he really deserved. So I really appreciate all those who have joined me for this video and will stay with me here and listen to Pravin's story. But before we dive in, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Native, and a brand new product that they just launched that I'm personally super excited to tell you about. There's probably a lot of you that don't know that I started on YouTube as a skincare channel because skincare is incredibly important to me, very important to me, and I love talking about it with people. And something I stressed in those videos was an often overlooked part of a skincare routine, sunscreen. I personally wear sunscreen every single day, even if I'm not going outside. People don't realize that the damaging rays of the sun can penetrate through the windows of your house and your car, and I'm pale to begin with, and I want to keep my skin young and healthy looking for as long as possible, and sunscreen is really one of the main ways you do that. Native has launched 2 mineral sunscreens, one for your face and one for your body, and there's a lot of merit to using a different sunscreen on your face than you do on your body for multiple reasons, which we don't have the time to get into, but trust me, especially if you have sensitive skin that's prone to breakouts or irritation. Native sunscreens are 30 SPF. They're designed to protect against both UVA and UVB rays. They're lightweight, non-greasy, and made with a hydrating formula. And this formula is made with 97% plant-based ingredients like avocado oil and vitamin E. They're also vegan and cruelty-free, and they come in 2 amazing and subtle scents, coconut and pineapple and rosé. They do also have an unscented option, which I'm glad about because I get the face sunscreen in unscented since my skin is prone to throw temper tantrums. The best part of the sunscreens, though, is the application. I've always searched for a sunscreen that will look good under makeup because most of the ones I've used, they end up looking good at first, but within a few hours, they make my skin really greasy and oily and shiny, and it breaks up my foundation. It's just bad. But these sunscreens from Native, they don't do that. They look amazing under makeup. I'm wearing it right now. I've had my makeup on for about 3 hours, and there's no separation, there's no issues. Native's sunscreens are mineral sunscreens as opposed to chemical sunscreens. Mineral sunscreen works by sitting on top of your skin and blocking the harmful UV rays that way, and Native sunscreens are made with non-nano zinc. Mineral sunscreen also works as soon as you put it on, whereas a lot of chemical sunscreens, you'll read in the instructions that they want you to wait a period of time before going out into the sun. That's why I switched to mineral sunscreens years ago. No muss, no fuss. They look great under makeup. They work much better. I think they're better for your skin. Not only do these sunscreens work under makeup, but they leave behind no white residue or a white cast on your skin. And I know if you've tried some of these sunscreens that are out there, you know what I mean. Like this white cast, it makes you look like a ghost. So Native sunscreens are really easy to use and blend into many different skin tones because none of that is happening. I cannot also stress the importance of vitamin D enough, though. So you should talk to your doctor and see if you're low in vitamin D, which most people are, especially since we spent the majority of this past year inside. And then you can obviously work with your doctor and find a supplement or formulate a diet so that you make sure you're getting that vitamin D into your system. I love these sunscreens. In fact, I have to order more within the next week or so. And Native is so excited to launch their new sunscreens that they're giving you 30% off both the face and the body sunscreen. Normally, those would both cost you $36, but if you use code StephanieH8, you can get them both for just $25. So just click the link in the description box, use code StephanieH8, and you'll get 30% off your new favorite sunscreen. Thank you so much to Native for sponsoring this video, and let's dive in. So as I said, I've spent a lot of time in the past weeks talking to the people who knew Pravin the best, the people who raised him and loved him, who valued him and treasured him. And as a result, I kind of feel like I knew him, and I definitely feel that I wanted to know him. I want to spend a little time talking about what an amazing human being Pravin was, how the world was better with him in it, so that you can really understand the hole that was left behind and the loss that's felt by those who no longer get to see his face, hear his voice, or feel his presence. First, I want to thank the people who have given me their time and their trust, and who in return I've given my heart and my loyalty to. It's no easy thing asking a mother to talk about a son who's been taken from her. It's not easy to ask her to relive the most painful moments of her life. It's not going to be easy for the mother, and it's not going to be easy for the person who's asking the mother to go through this all again, which is what I had to do. But that's exactly what lovely Verghese has done with me, repeatedly, over and over for weeks. She talked about Pravin as a small child. She talked about him as a youngster who put a smile on her face. She talked about him as a young man who gave her so much pride as she watched him grow and come into his own. This woman has more grace and strength in her pinky finger than I will ever have in my entire life. Her name is Lovely, and she's truly a lovely person, a kind and compassionate person that anyone would be lucky to have in their lives. And I feel incredibly blessed to have her in my life now. I also want to thank Ashley, Pravin's cousin, who was more like a brother to Pravin than a cousin. Ashley's one of the nicest, most intelligent, most polite young men I've ever had the privilege to speak to. He's soft-spoken. He has an amazing sense of humor. He's gentle. He's motivated. He's kind. Ashley and Pravin grew up so close that after I talked to Ashley and had gotten to know more about Pravin, I told Lovely that it seemed as if they were two sides of the same coin. Where Ashley was quiet and reserved, Pravin was outgoing and animated, but they were both raised right, with love and kindness and rules. They were raised to know the difference between right and wrong, and they were taught to make choices that not only benefited themselves, but others as well. Lastly, I want to thank Monica Zukas, the woman who didn't even know Pravin or any of his family, but felt compelled to fight for a young man who she felt had been denied justice. Monica knows this case inside and out. She's been by Lovely's side fighting for years as if Pravin was her own son. It doesn't matter what time it is, day or night, I will be able to reach out to Monica if I have a question as I'm researching or writing or diving into things. She's got the answer. She's right there. She has been amazing. And between Monica and Lovely, I have been lucky enough to receive a bunch of documentation about this case. Videotaped interviews with the police, state trooper, dashboard cams, tons of documents, pictures of Pravin that haven't really been made public, but I want to show you because I want there to be a real impact here on what state he was in when he was found. This was truly a collaborative effort, and I know there's dozens upon dozens more of individuals out there who've honored Pravin's memory and kept his legacy alive. And I want to say thank you to them as well, because we're not alone in this world. It feels like it sometimes. And while injustice and ugliness exists, we have to understand we're so much stronger with a community beside us and behind us. We can see real change happen if we work together, because after all, it takes a village. And I hope that after hearing Pravin's story, his village will have so many more members from this community standing shoulder to shoulder with each other, demanding change, demanding action, and demanding a better world where we all can live happily and in peace and with the basic rights that we're allowed, where all people matter and all people are treated with respect and love. With that being said, let's talk about Pravin Verghese, his amazing life and his tragic death that was contributed to by another young man who has yet to face any real repercussions. Let's start with Pravin's parents, Lovely and Matthew. They were both originally from a place in South India called Kerala, which locals call the land of coconuts. And I did some research into Kerala. It is a truly beautiful place, but Lovely and Matthew wanted to pursue The American Dream, and in 1985, Matthew went to America, following his sister, who had already come over in the 70s. He and Lovely were married in India in 1988, and within 2 years, Lovely had her visa, and she was able to join Matthew, who had gotten his degree and was working as a respiratory therapist. Lovely had gotten her nursing degree in India, so she was able to start working here as a nurse right away, and they began planning their life together, a life that would include children, a home in Morton Grove, which is a city about 13 miles away from Chicago, Illinois, and happiness, obviously, right? Family, home, happiness. It's what everyone wants. At first, Lovely struggled to get pregnant, but in 1993, the couple welcomed their first child into the world, a daughter named Priya. After having to wait so long for a child, Lovely and Matthew were quickly blessed with another pregnancy, not long after Priya was born, and on July 29, 1994, Pravin arrived, and he would become Lovely and Matthew's first and only son. Finding out they were having another baby so soon after having their first baby was obviously a surprise, but then again, Lovely said everything that had to do with Pravin was a pleasant surprise. He was a happy baby who became a happy child. And even though at this point Matthew and Lovely thought that they were done having kids, 7 years after Pravin was born, they added another member to their family, a daughter named Priti. The two oldest children, Priya and Pravin, grew up very close, almost like twins, because they were just 17 months apart in age. Lovely and Matthew both worked in the medical field, and they had help from extended family with the children, but it was really always important to Matthew that the kids have a parent at home and around and involved in their lives. So for 14 years, he worked overnight shifts, 12-hour night shifts, so that he could be home with them during the day while Lovely worked, and then she could be home with them at night. All three of the Varghese children just loved their father. In one of our many phone conversations, Lovely said to me that all three of her children, her husband's chest was their favorite place to be. You know, it brought that comfort, that safety, that love. And that remains true to this day. Pravin was also a sensitive and compassionate child, and he would cry each night when Matthew had to go to work. Lovely told me that in order to feel closer to his father while he was gone, Pravin would wear Matthew's shirt under his own t-shirt when he went to bed. And she told me this funny story of how one night Pravin had come downstairs, to get a drink or something, and her father, Pravin's grandfather, he sort of teased him about wearing his father's shirt to bed, because at this point Pravin was in the 8th grade. And this caused Pravin to just break out into tears, because that's who he was. He loved his family so deeply. He had that feeling of security when his parents were around, and he wasn't ashamed to wear his heart on his sleeve. It was also around the time when Pravin was in 8th grade that Matthew stopped working night shifts, and I'm sure that Pravin was happy to have his father home with him at night when he and his parents would get down and pray before bed, with little Pravin perched between them, his head bowed, counting his blessings before closing his eyes for the night. At Pravin's funeral, Lovely told her son, quote, "The space between me and Daddy when we pray will be there forever for you," end quote. Pravin and his siblings were also very involved in many activities, especially in the Indian community, and there was something going on every weekend. Pravin was in Boy Scouts, he sang in the choir at the family church, and Lovely told me that this was a big church with over 400 families attending, so getting into the choir was really competitive, but Pravin got in when he was 9 years old. He was a good singer. He was very musical. He was also in the school choir, and he was in the drama club in junior high school, where he played the character of Rooster in the musical Annie when he was in the 7th grade. Lovely said that he killed it, right? He did so good. He did so well that parents were coming up to her after the show to congratulate her on his performance. He could sing, he could act, he loved to dance. He won many Indian dancing competitions, and whenever he was around, music and activity followed. Lovely said he always had music playing, and he would get so into it that he'd start drumming on the counters or stomping in the shower. As he grew up into a young adult, Pravin became more involved in activities at his school and in his community. He ran cross-country for the school. He was part of the DECA Club, which is a club that prepares emerging leaders and entrepreneurs for college and careers. He played on the church football and basketball team. He was active in the youth group. He taught vacation Bible school, and he loved kids. Lovely said that whenever they were at church, if you didn't see Pravin for a couple of minutes, you would find him in the baby room. He would be checking in on the kids and the babies and playing with them. Lovely said there wasn't a kid at that church who didn't, ride around on Pravin's back or love Pravin. Both Lovely and Ashley told me that Pravin loved food. He could be considered a foodie. If there was a new restaurant opening up in Chicago, Pravin and his father Matthew would make sure to be there. And Pravin also liked to take pictures of his food before he ate. But he didn't only like fancy new restaurants. He had some local favorites as well. Chipotle was his jam, and he would ride his bike to a local family-owned place called Johnny's Grill 3 or 4 times a week to eat there. He also liked some traditional Indian food, especially beef cutlets, which he would request his father to make for him when he came home from college on the weekends. Pravin had a big personality. He really was just this very charismatic, outgoing, positive sort of person. He loved his birthday, and every year he would make sure there was this grand production. Lovely said he pretty much planned it all out, and he just told his family and friends where to show up. For his 16th birthday, they had so many kids attend his party that Lovely was afraid they wouldn't have enough food and cake, because that was the thing. Pravin was well liked by his peers. He was hard not to like. He couldn't stand to see someone upset or down, and he would go out of his way to lift their mood, even if it meant putting on a wig, being silly, playing a prank on them that would pull them out of their bad mood. He would do it. His cousin Ashley told me that Pravin was the person who, when you went to like a family party, you were waiting for Pravin to show up because the party would suddenly become so much more fun and full of life. He also couldn't hold a grudge. He did not argue with people often because he was just so good-natured and easy to get along with, but when he did argue with someone, he was always the first person to reach out and try to make amends. On the weekends, he spent time with his father watching football or basketball on TV or playing basketball outside in the driveway. And Lovely told me this funny story because the basketball hoop was in the driveway, but she also had like her little garden, and there was some rose plants by the driveway, and every time they played basketball, the ball would land on the roses and they were getting crushed. And Lovely said, move your basketball hoop because you're crushing my roses. And Pravin told her, well, move your roses. And then I think it was the next weekend, he actually dug the roses up for her and replanted them someplace else. And Lovely said that for years they didn't bloom. They just struggled. They didn't grow. But after Pravin's death, they started blooming again. And this is just one of the many things that have happened since Pravin's death that Lovely feels are signs that Pravin is close by. Lovely thinks that Pravin always wanted to be a police officer from a very young age, but he might have kept it a secret because he knew that his family really wanted him to go into the medical field. They're all in the medical field. And there's a lot of stability in the medical field. There's good benefits, but Pravin never had an interest in that. Lovely looks back and she remembers all the signs that Pravin was itching for a career in law enforcement. He loved to read crime books and mysteries growing up. He loved Scooby-Doo as a small child, and his favorite shows and movies to watch were crime movies and crime shows where he would point out the clues and things that didn't add up and say, oh, the cops should question this person, or this should be the next step. When he was in 3rd grade, some Navy soldiers visited his Boy Scout troop, and Lovely said that he stared at them with his eyes wide with admiration. And one time, the family was coming back from India when Pravin was younger, and they stopped over in Kuwait on the way home back to the United States. And while they were riding in an elevator, some U.S. Army soldiers got on the elevator, and little Pravin just started talking to them. He was so outgoing. He would just talk to anybody. You didn't have to be known to him. You could be a perfect stranger. He would just start a conversation with you because he loved learning about new people and new things and new cultures. So he would just start up a conversation to try and learn about you and, be friendly. And he asked them, when are you going back to the United States? We're going back now. When are you guys going back? And they laughed and they were like, well, we wish we could go back with you right now, because we don't want to be here. In the 11th grade, when Pravin started thinking about college, he and his mother met with a guidance counselor. Now, Lovely had thought that Pravin was going to major in physical therapy. He kind of mentioned that he might. So when he told the counselor that his major was still undecided, Lovely was very surprised to hear this. And later she asked him, what's going on? You can't just have an undecided major. I thought you were going into physical therapy. We're not going to pay for college if you're not going to, settle on something. And that's when he told her that he wanted to be a police officer. It was his plan to major in criminal justice, work as a cop for 2 years, and then join the FBI. Now, of course, Lovely was worried, and she asked him to reconsider because it's such a dangerous job, but he could not be swayed. Lovely later told the Chicago Tribune, quote, "He was so interested in solving mysteries, and here we are. He's left us with something so mysterious now," end quote. Pravin's cousin Ashley grew up with Pravin. They spent time together. They went to high school together. They were best friends. So it only seemed right that when they started looking at colleges, that they choose the same one and room together and continue their lifelong friendship. They ended up settling on Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois. That's about a 5-hour drive from Chicago. Ashley said that they wanted a little space from family, a little more freedom, a chance to spread their wings, experience living on their own, but they were also both very close to their families, so they didn't want to be too far. They wanted to be close enough that they could drive home for visits. This was their first taste of real independence and adult living.
Carbondale is a town about 15 minutes from my hometown of Marion. It has SIU, Salukis, go Dogs. This is my alma mater. I graduated from SIU in Carbondale. I'd say the population is probably about 25,000 or more, I would say. In its day, in the late 80s, we were known to be one of the biggest party schools. And during Halloween, the whole strip, where all the bars were, cars started getting flipped over and people were getting literally so wild. SIU's always been known as a party school. They also are a good college, but they had their day. Whenever Pravin decided he wanted to go into criminal justice, first of all, his mom lost it because everybody in their family is medical, and that's what she expected. They kind of looked it up a little bit. They were like, this is like a party school. And he's like, Mom, every college is a party school. So we have a lot of beautiful scenery around here, though. This is Southern Illinois. There's Garden of the Gods. There's the Shawnee National Forest. We have the Marion State Penitentiary that often holds mobsters. So we're a beautiful area here in Southern Illinois. Since Molly Young's case in 2012 and then Pravin's case in 2014, there has in general been a huge spike in crime in Carbondale. There has been a huge loss of student attendance at SIU. This, we think, all the attention that we've garnered toward these few cases has put a negative or dark cloud over SIU and Carbondale for quite some time. But Pravin came from Chicago. I mean, he lives in the Skokie, Morton Grove area, but I mean, he's a city kid. He's from a big area, 10 million times bigger than Carbondale. So like I say, when they said, he wasn't familiar, yeah, he was. He knows Carbondale well. It's this big compared to his Chicago. In Southern Illinois, the most diverse area is SIU and Carbondale. However, Carbondale is like a center party spot for all of our smaller, more rural towns around the area. And there's a lot of things about this case and about how we roll that weren't a part of who Pravin was. They weren't a part of his upbringing. They weren't a part of his conservative upbringing. They weren't a part of what was instilled in him. For instance, on the weekends here, once you hit 14 or 15, you can't go downtown to the city with a multitude of things to do. We grab a case of beer and start a bonfire, and we're kicking it in the sticks. So things that are normal here for our Southern Illinois boys, like being rough, rugged, and raw and rowdy with your trucks and going mudding and four-wheeler riding, raising hell. People around the campfire, everybody's drinking as teenagers. People get rowdy, get drunk, get in fist fights. And because we all know each other, we break it up and we keep the party rolling. I feel like this is a typical situation of where one of our Southern Illinois boys was doing what he always did, but he came across somebody that was not used to that. Pravin came from a very conservative, polite background. He was a boy. He was silly. He was funny. He wasn't a perfect angel like that, but there's a difference. Just because it's normal and common in our area for people to bust out in fistfights, drunk fistfights, doesn't mean that it's legal or acceptable everywhere all the time just because you're teenagers and that's how you rock and roll.
They started their freshman year in the fall of 2012, and they shared an on-campus dorm. And Pravin did major in criminal justice. Over the next year, they formed a very close, tight-knit group of friends with other students like Nate, who was also a criminal justice major, Ruben, and Kyle. Pravin was very focused on his academics. I did go through some of his social media, and a lot of his posts are talking about, staying up late to work on this paper, getting up early to work on, studying. He seemed to be really goal-oriented. Like, he had a plan. He knew what he had to do to get there. He was following it. But he also worked as a delivery driver for Jimmy John's. And if anybody doesn't know Jimmy John's, it's almost in every college town. I think they have sandwiches and subs and stuff there. And Pravin, being a young kid, he also knew how to have fun. At college, just like at home, Pravin was the life of the party.
If you smell Ashley's cousin with the rock, it's cooking. Hey, Ashley's cousin.
By their sophomore year, Ashley and Pravin were sharing an off-campus apartment with Nate, and Pravin was starting to get a little homesick, and he was making trips back to see his family a bit more frequently. The weekend before he died, he went home and then came back to SIU with beef cutlets that his father had made, and they were still in the refrigerator of his apartment when his parents got a call that he'd gone missing. It was a Wednesday night, February 12th, 2014. Pravin called his parents that night like he did every night to check in, and then he and his friends started talking about their plans for the evening. Ashley and Nate, they had to be to work by 11. They both worked the door at a local college bar called Sticks, which wasn't far from Jimmy John's. And apparently it was the owner's birthday that night, who they all knew. Pravin really liked him. Their whole friend group went to Sticks almost every weekend. So they were going to do a little celebration that evening, probably a little toast, like make an announcement. Pravin wanted to be there for that. But they'd also heard about a house party on Twitter. So they planned to go over to the house party first for a bit before they all headed to Sticks. Earlier in the evening, Pravin had been debating whether to go out that night or not because he'd already worked his shift at Jimmy John's that day and then he went to the gym and he had an early class and an exam the next morning. But in the end, they all drove over together around 9:45 p.m. They parked near Sticks and then they walked about 5 blocks to 606 College Street. That's the address of the party. It was very cold that night and getting colder as the night went on. It was about 19 degrees, I believe, when they would have been walking to the party from the parked car, and that's 10 degrees colder than it usually was at this time of the year. In fact, that February was the 7th coldest on record for Carbondale in the history of, when they had records. But these are college kids, right? They're going to a party. They don't want to be wearing thick winter coats or multiple layers when the longest they're going to be outside for is like a 10 to 15 minute walk. And believe me, I remember these days all too well. Us girls going out in tank tops and skirts, and it's freezing. But we obviously were more worried about form than function. That night, Pravin was just wearing jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt. Ashley and Nate, they only stayed at this house party for about an hour before leaving at 10:45 because they had to get to their shifts at Sticks at 11. And the plan was that the rest of their crew, Pravin, Ruben, and Kyle, and some of their girlfriends, they would all meet them at the bar after they were done at the party. Ashley was working the front door of the bar that night, and he saw Ruben and Kyle arrive around 11:30 or 12, as well as some girlfriends that they'd been at the party with. But he didn't see Pravin come in. Ashley said he thought maybe Pravin had gone in through the back door, or maybe he'd even gone home to bed because he did have that exam the next day, so he didn't think too much of it. Ashley went home that night after work, so it would have been the next morning. I think it was about 3:30 in the morning that he got home, and he noticed that Pravin's door was closed, and once again, he just assumed he was asleep. It's the middle of the night. Pravin's got an early class. He's probably in there asleep. But the next morning, when Ashley woke up and knocked on Pravin's door, there was no answer, and the door was locked. But once again, Ashley didn't think much of it because he'd gotten in very late the night before. So he'd slept in late. He slept until 11, and he knew that Pravin had an early class, so he figured that Pravin had already just left and gone to class, locking his door behind him, as he always did. And Ashley told me something that will come into play later. Pravin liked to walk everywhere. So Ashley and Kyle, they would drive to class, but their off-campus apartment wasn't far from the school. It was probably like a 25-minute walk, and Pravin really liked walking. He was health conscious. He worked out. He took care of himself, and he didn't mind walking places. So Pravin always walked to school where Ashley and Kyle would drive. And the door to Pravin's bedroom being locked, it wasn't suspicious at all because whenever Pravin would leave and he wasn't in the apartment, he would lock his door. Ashley did start to get worried, however, when he got a text from their roommate, Kyle, who had the same class as Pravin that morning, because remember, they were both criminal justice majors. Kyle said Pravin had not shown up to class, and this was odd, because Pravin was very serious about his education. He did not miss classes. That's when Ashley started calling and texting his cousin, but Pravin never picked up the calls or answered any of the texts. At first, the phone just rang and rang before going to voicemail. Eventually, though, Ashley's calls were going directly to voicemail, meaning Pravin's phone had either been turned off or it had run out of battery. Ashley started messaging all of their friends, but no one had seen or heard from Pravin, so he and Kyle started driving around Carbondale. They went back to the house that the party had been at the night before, where they'd last seen Pravin. They checked alleys and dumpsters, they called the hospitals, but there was no sign of Pravin. The person Ashley did not call was Pravin's mother, Lovely, because Lovely didn't really know that Pravin went to parties, and she wouldn't necessarily approve. And I mean, after talking to Lovely, I think she did know that Pravin went to parties, but it was kind of one of those things where if they had mentioned it to her, it would have been this whole conversation about how you need to be focusing on school and not partying and drinking. And Ashley didn't want to go through that. And he didn't want Pravin to have to go through that if he turned up safe and sound, which at this point, you're a young kid, your cousin's missing, but he's a college kid. And this isn't really his normal behavior. But at the same time, your immediate thought isn't, my cousin's dead. Your thought is, he's not here, but when he comes back, I don't want his mom to be mad at him. Ashley did call the apartment manager, and the apartment manager came up and unlocked Pravin's bedroom door, but Pravin's room looked like it always did. It was the room of a college kid. Unmade bed, clothes all over the floor, there was probably a pizza box hiding somewhere. There was no sign that Pravin had or hadn't slept in his bed the night before. At that point, Ashley realized he needed to call the police, and an officer arrived at the apartment at a little after 7 p.m. to take his statement and get a description of Pravin, what he'd been wearing, and when they'd last seen him. In Morton Grove, at Lovely's house, at around 9 p.m. the phone rang, and when Lovely answered it, she was told that her only son was missing, and no one had seen him for almost 24 hours. Now, Lovely told me that for the past 24 hours or so, she'd been feeling really sick to her stomach and uneasy about something that she couldn't put her finger on. When the police called her, they wanted to know if Pravin had come home for some reason, if he was there, if she'd heard from him. But he wasn't there, and she hadn't heard from him. And the rock that had formed in her stomach over that past day, it started to feel bigger and heavier. When Lovely got off the phone with the Carbondale police, she began to scream and cry, and she was praying that her son was not in danger and that he would return to her safely. And then she sprang into action, because this is a woman who feels things, okay? She feels things. She's got emotions, and she will express those emotions, but she's not going to sit around and wait for something to happen. Lovely is a woman of action. The family got into their car and they drove to Carbondale, calling Pravin's phone the whole way. But of course, he never answered. They arrived a bit after 4 in the morning and they went with Ashley to the police station. But as we've seen in so many cases, the police told her not to worry about it too much. Pravin was a college kid. This was a college town. He would turn up. He was probably just out getting into trouble. Lovely said the police officer she spoke to actually told her, been there, done that, when referring to Pravin's random disappearance. So I'm not sure if he meant like, been there, done that, like I've seen many college kids do this, or been there, done that, like he himself had once disappeared for a full day as a college kid. Maybe both. I don't know. But either way, Lovely insisted that this was not like Pravin. Her son would not just drop off the map without contacting her or someone else in the family or multiple people, right? This was not like him. And I know that all parents say that. And I think that the police should listen when parents say that, because no one knows their kids more than their mom and their dad, especially their patterns, their normal behavior. She was very insistent. Pravin was always in contact with her family. They texted every day. They talked every day. He would never do this.
And they thought a lot of college kids do that and he will come back. And we were sure that if he was in a position to call or come back, he would.
But of course, her concerns, the concerns of the family, they were pushed to the side and sort of disregarded initially. So Lovely and her family checked into a Carbondale motel. They weren't planning to leave until they knew where Pravin was. So if you remember, the last time anyone saw Pravin, it was Wednesday night, the 12th of February. Thursday, all day Thursday, Ashley's looking for him, can't find him. And Lovely and her family, they arrived very early in the morning of Friday, February 14th. And by mid-morning of this same day, more members of his family, Pravin's family, started coming into Carbondale. By Saturday, there were more than 200 people who'd traveled to Carbondale from the Chicago area, the Detroit area, St. Louis, all there to support the Verghese family and help look for Pravin. These were family members, friends of family members, members of the community and church, a massive amount of people who dropped everything they were doing to book literally every room in every hotel and motel in Carbondale, because that's how important Pravin and his family were to the people around them. Together, the volunteers and the police began a massive search, and Carbondale Police Sergeant Rich Brunner reported that they'd searched the majority of the SIU campus, as well as the city on foot, by air, and with dogs. But there was no sign of the 19-year-old, who'd never been out of contact with his family for more than a few hours, much less a few days. A reward was offered for information about Pravin's whereabouts, and by February 17th, this reward had reached $15,000. But there was still no leads, and this reward will become important and come into play. The family started speaking to the media. specifically Lovely and Pravin's sister Priya, who was his older sister by only 17 months. Remember, they grew up very, very close. And they talked to the media and they begged the public to come forward with anything that they might know, but no one did. Well, actually, they did come forward, but Lovely and her family didn't know that at the time. Lovely also told me that the police were actually incredibly irritated that she and the family had been talking to the media because allegedly it would negatively affect the investigation, which is ridiculous because you've got a college kid missing in a small college town where the college is the main attraction to this town, right? It's a very important institution in Carbondale. And he is a student at SIU and he's missing. So why wouldn't you talk to the media and get information about him? Because at this point, it's an investigation into a missing person. There's no criminal investigation right here. So if you want clues, if you want leads, if you want people to start calling in tips, you kind of have to go to the media. And listen, I do always try to be fair to law enforcement. There's just certain cases I can't be. And it is disgusting the way Lovely and her family were treated by not only law enforcement, but several other people in Carbondale. So the police said to Lovely, if she wanted to talk to the media, she should be coordinating with the college SIU in order to talk to the college. They should work together to do that because they would tell her what she could say, what she couldn't say, etc. But Lovely really believes that if she had not gone to the media and gotten Pravin's name and face out there, the police wouldn't have, and Pravin might never have been found to this day. So I disagree with this a little bit. I think he would have been found before 2021, probably months after. But I think he would have been in a very different state. He would have been incredibly decomposed, which would have made finding any evidence on him difficult. And I'm not saying that the Carbondale police wanted him to be found at a later date where getting evidence would have been difficult, but I'm just saying that if he had been found at a later date, getting evidence probably would have been difficult. Now, in the early morning hours of February 17th, Lovely was startled from sleep by a jarring dream. She said in this dream, she saw Pravin wearing the same jeans and shirt that he was wearing in his missing persons flyer. He was in the back seat of a vehicle that was going at high speed, but suddenly the vehicle stopped on the side of the road. The back door opened and someone pushed Pravin out of the car. In her dream, Lovely could see Pravin rolling down a hill, stopping at the bottom, and lying motionless on his right side with his right arm stretched out. Lovely told me that in Indian culture, an early morning dream means that it's probably going to come true, especially if they happen between 4 and 6 a.m. And some people might scoff at that and say, oh, that's silly, but there's so much in this universe, in this world, that we don't know and understand, that we really can't even explain. So I don't ever write off anything like this. And I hope that I'm talking to people who are going to keep open minds. Now, this same morning, the 17th, Lovely and the family met with the deputy chief of Carbondale for a briefing, and she told him about the dream because to her, it really meant something. To her, it was a sign, but of course, he didn't see it that way. A couple things happened on this day and the following days that I want to discuss. So, first of all, Pravin had gone missing early Thursday morning, so we don't really know if it was late Wednesday night or early Thursday morning. And they did do searches for him the following Friday and Saturday. But then on Saturday, the police told Pravin's family that if they didn't get any more leads, they'd have to stop searching. Lovely begged them to not stop looking for her son, but they did not put out any search parties on Sunday because apparently they didn't have enough staff. One of Lovely's cousins reached out to Sheila Simon, who at that time was the Illinois lieutenant governor, and told her, this kid's missing and they're going to not search for him. So Sheila called the Carbondale police and told them to keep looking. And I do want to point out that as many people in this case that dropped the ball, and, I would even go as far as to say just completely didn't do their jobs, there are just as many who really put themselves out there for Pravin and his family. So that's something to keep in mind. You got to take the good with the bad, but in every area of darkness, there is a point of light. At this point, on Monday, the 17th, one of the detectives also asked Lovely when she thought her and her family would be going back home to the Chicago area, which is absolutely crazy because they haven't found her son yet, and they're expecting her to leave before getting any answers. I mean, this is the tip of the iceberg, okay? But like I said, the treatment that this family received from multiple law enforcement and government officials during this ordeal, it's objectively disgusting. So, it was Tuesday, February 18th. Pravin had been missing for 5 days. The dean of SIU came to the Quality Inn in Carbondale, where Lovely was staying, to touch base. The dean told Lovely that the police had a tip and they were out there kind of following up on this tip. So they should not be alarmed if they heard a helicopter. She wanted to let the family know, like, if you see a helicopter flying around out there or hear it, that's what this is. There was also a press conference scheduled for the next day, and the dean had brought a paper with her, which essentially told the family, like, what they should say, where they should stand, etc. She'd been there for about an hour when she got a phone call and left the room, returning with the deputy chief. So in my personal opinion, this is just my opinion, okay? I believe that the dean had already been notified by the police that they were about to recover Pravin's body, and she'd been instructed to go and sit with the family and kind of keep them busy and chatting until she got the news, so she could almost act like a buffer between the Verghese family and law enforcement. That's just my opinion, though. Don't come for me. Lovely was informed that her son had been found dead off the side of the road.
And she came up with the deputy chief, and he told us they found him, and he was not alive.
The detective who notified Lovely told her a bunch of stuff. First, he said that Pravin had been very drunk and probably on drugs. And then he said that Pravin had gotten a ride that night that he went missing from a recent acquaintance. And at some point, while he was with this recent acquaintance, an argument had happened in the vehicle, and Pravin got out of the vehicle when it was stopped on the side of the road, and he ran into the woods next to the highway. And at this point, because he was so drunk and probably on drugs, he got disoriented. He didn't know where he was or how to get back to the road. The temperature had sunk at that point to single digits. He wasn't dressed for the weather, and so he died of hypothermia.
And there were three things he said. Number one, he said, Pravin had taken a ride with a recent acquaintance. No, you and I are recent acquaintances. This was a complete stranger, somebody he'd never seen in his life. I knew that typically he walked everywhere. He was only going on a 4-block adventure that night from one place to the other. Why would he get in with a stranger and be 5 miles across town in the woods dead? It didn't make sense.
So obviously at this point, Lovely doesn't really know what to think. She knows her son, and he doesn't do drugs. But she also knows, he's a young man in college. He might be experimenting with things. She doesn't know what to think. All she knows is that her child is gone. But spoiler alert, I have to say this. I'm not going to build up the suspense. Obviously, an autopsy is going to be done later with a toxicology report. And when the toxicology report came back, it was negative for everything, including alcohol, okay? So this police officer, this detective, whatever, is telling Lovely, your son was really drunk and probably on drugs, and he didn't even have the slightest clue if that was true or not. Not the slightest clue, because the toxicology report hadn't come back yet. And I think it's really gross to tell a parent something like that. It's like victim blaming, first of all. You're there notifying the mother that her son's dead, and you need to give a reason of why you think that happened. Not just it was an accident, he went into the woods and died of hypothermia. We're waiting to see what other factors could be involved. But you're going to come right out and say, oh, he was really drunk and probably on drugs. But I digress. So obviously Pravin's family, they want to know, where was he found? Where was he this whole time that you guys have been searching for him and you haven't found him? And the family was brought out into the hallway of the hotel outside of their room, and they were brought to a window. And the detective pointed to a wooded area that was just 500 yards away. And they were like, this is where he was found. Now, Lovely and her family had initially checked into a different motel upon arriving in Carbondale, but after a few days, they'd relocated to this Quality Inn. And Lovely believes that Pravin brought her there, closer to where his body was lying, cold and alone. Pravin had been found around 9:30 that morning in a densely wooded area east of Buffalo Wild Wings off of East Main Street in Carbondale. He was found lying on his back, wearing only jeans and one sock. His shirt was found under his right thigh, and the other sock was found within an inch of his right foot. His jeans had been pulled down slightly, and his wallet was found in the front waistband of his boxer shorts. There were also a pair of shoes found nearby, and I guess the police assumed that they were Pravin's shoes. I mean, I don't say I guess they assumed they were Pravin's shoes. Like, they assumed they were Pravin's shoes. But it turns out that they were not his shoes at all. And it took years for that realization to come to light after a DNA test was done on the shoes and his DNA was not on the shoes. And his actual shoes that he was wearing that night, they've never been found. So whose shoes were they that were found near his body? And where were his shoes? Well, these are good questions, but nobody really knows the answers to them. It does seem kind of like someone took his shoes off his body and then left their old shoes behind, if you ask me. It just seems too coincidental that his shoes are gone and these old shoes are just randomly laying there. Or maybe they were just an old pair of shoes left behind in the woods, but they weren't Pravin's. So where did his shoes go? We know he was wearing shoes that night, right? We know it would have been pretty tough to get out into those woods without shoes. It was freezing. There's dirt and there's thorns and branches. This is a very wild and kind of overgrown area. Yet here Pravin was with no shoes on, but also no dirt or rips in his socks, no scratches on the bottom of his feet, which you would expect to see if he'd been running through the woods without shoes. So we have a few possibilities. He went into the woods with shoes, but at some point they were removed, maybe by some random person walking by, or maybe by those famous athletic shoe-stealing squirrels, who knows? Or maybe he didn't get into the woods himself, right? Maybe his shoes had been taken off by him or someone else before he went into the woods, and maybe he was carried into the woods by another person or persons, but we will get to that. Now, if you look at the post-mortem photos, you can see clearly that Pravin had been through an ordeal of some sort before he died, an ordeal that had nothing to do with hypothermia. He had many bruises on his body, many scratches on his body, and a very large bruise on his forehead, which later the pathologist and the state's attorney, Michael Carr, would refer to as a small bruise or absence of significant trauma. By the way, the pathologist and Michael Carr are not the same person. Michael Carr was the state's attorney. The pathologist was a different guy, but I know it didn't sound like that when I said it. I'm going to put a picture up of Pravin. Now, most pictures you find online, they're blurred out, or there's a picture of Pravin at his funeral, but there's a lot of makeup on. So I'm going to put a picture of Pravin when he was found, and you tell me if this looks like a small bruise or absence of significant trauma. Now, maybe in the front-facing picture that I have up now, you would look at that and say, oh, yeah, I guess, maybe it's dirt. Maybe it's just bruising. Maybe it just looks worse than it is. But if you look at his side profile picture, you can clearly see that there is an indentation in his head. So I'm not sure what kind of sliding scale the pathologist and Michael Carr used to figure out what's significant trauma, but I think, in my humble opinion, this is significant trauma. That was completely left out of the autopsy and later statements about Pravin's wounds. Now, I want to rewind a little bit and go back to February 17th, the day before Pravin was found. A young man was interviewed by police on the 17th, and this same young man had called Crime Stoppers the day before, claiming to have information about Pravin. His name was Jonathan Stanley, and according to him, he and his cousin Gage Bethune had been watching the news the night before, and they'd seen a story about Pravin being missing. Jonathan said at that point, Gage became nervous and he needed some air, and he told him that Pravin had been the guy he'd gotten into a fight with the previous week, the night that Pravin went missing, actually. Later, I believe it was during the trial, Jonathan claimed that when Gage had seen the news, he'd become upset and thrown up. Jonathan told the police that he had decided to call the tip-in because he had, quote, seen a family lost their son and the grandma lost their grandkid and the uncle lost their nephew, just anything like that. And my daddy's always told me, end quote. By the way, we never find out what his daddy's always told him. In the transcript of his interview, he just says, my daddy's always told me, and then it becomes inaudible. And I don't even think he ever really did say what his daddy always told him, because he just launches into talking about if he was the boy who was missing, he'd want someone who knew something to come forward. And that brings him right to the $15,000 reward. This is the transcript of Jonathan Stanley's interview with the police. This is the first page. They ask him, what's your name? Where are you from? What's your address? Etc. This is the second page. And this is where he brings up the reward. First paragraph, second page. He says, quote, I'd figure I'd be the one to inaudible if someone put up $15,000 for a 5-day missing person. There's something serious going on, so I just came in, end quote. Jonathan tells the police that on the night of the 12th, he drove to Carbondale with his cousin Gage and 2 other friends. Jonathan was driving Gage's black Dodge 1500 truck, and they were going to the birthday party of a friend on College Street. This friend was named Sarah. He said they got there at about 7:30 or 8. It was just getting dark, but it wasn't pitch black out yet. Jonathan claims at this party he was not drinking because he'd gotten sick very shortly after they'd gotten there, and he was throwing up, and then he ended up passing out on the couch for about 2.5 hours. Jonathan goes on to say that as far as he knew, his cousin Gage wasn't drinking either, which is funny considering other witnesses from that evening, including the people who drove into Carbondale with Jonathan and Gage that night. They claimed Gage was very drunk, even before arriving at the party. And in his own interview the same day, Gage would admit to the police more than once that he'd been drinking. Jonathan said that at some point Gage decided to leave, but none of the 3 people who'd driven into Carbondale with him were ready to leave at this point. Allegedly, Gage told his cousin and their buddies that he was going home, and he would drop them off in Frankfort if they wanted, but he wasn't feeling the party anymore. Okay, so Frankfort is a place in Illinois. That is not where Gage is from. Gage is from El Dorado, a town that's about an hour drive away from Carbondale, but I think Jonathan or some of the other kids were from Frankfort. It's only about a 30-minute drive from Frankfort to Carbondale, and I do believe that Jonathan and Gage's grandparents lived in Frankfort. I also want to point out the fact that Jonathan Stanley says he got sick and he passed out for 2.5 hours, but then he also is awake and conscious when Gage is leaving the party, because he says that Gage told them like he was going and they'd have to find a different ride. And later in Gage's interview, when he is asked, did you leave with anybody? Gage says no, that his cousin was asleep. So there's so many different stories, changing stories, different series of events, little details that may seem unimportant as you're going through them, but as they add up, you're like, did you guys actually live the same night? Were you actually in the same area? Because your details are not really lining up. Jonathan said that once Gage left, he and the other kids, they didn't really have a plan on how to get back to Frankfort, but they figured they would just call one of the guy's girlfriends and she would come and pick them up. What time did Gage leave the party? I mean, it's kind of important that we know when Gage left the party, right? Like at least within an hour time period. Well, Jonathan said that Gage left sometime between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., which I think is a pretty big window when you're like kind of looking to get a strong alibi. And Jonathan says, quote, I know it wasn't early, but it wasn't late. Actually come to think about it, I don't think it was after midnight. If it was barely in that region. If it was after midnight, it was around the area. End quote. He talks in riddles, right? So Gage left the party alone, apparently, sometime in that 3-hour window, and then Jonathan left the party around 2:30, and he didn't see or talk to Gage until the next morning when Gage came to pick him up. So Gage Bethune has many stories of what happened that night. This is the first version, and to be fair, it's not technically Gage's version, right? Because it's being told to the police secondhand by Jonathan. However, it's clear to me that Jonathan got this information from Gage. Either that or he was with Gage that night and he's claimed that he wasn't. So we either look at this version as version 1 of Gage's story, or we look at it as if Jonathan was there with Gage when Gage encountered Pravin. And according to Gage and Jonathan, they weren't together. So let's keep that in mind. Let's also keep in mind that we don't know what the true story is, because the only person who came out of this interaction alive has an inconsistent way of telling it. Jonathan said that when Gage came to pick him up the morning after the party, he had told him that the night before, when he was leaving the party, a kid had asked him for a ride. Now, I'll tell you the rest in Jonathan's own words from the transcript. He says, quote, I guess the kid took him to one or two houses, and was playing around with him. And, first he said, and then he started getting, tough with him, reaching over and poking him and stuff. Okay, so I can't really keep quoting Jonathan because he doesn't make sense. He's all over the place. But right after this, he starts talking about $20 or $25. And he says, no, I don't know about that $25, but I think it was in the cup holder or something. And so Gage told Jonathan that Pravin, who was in his car with him at this point, he tried to grab the money out of the cup holder, and he did take it. And then Gage asked him to give it back, and he asked him to give it back 10 times. So at this point, they're driving around Carbondale, and when Gage keeps asking Pravin to give him his money back, Pravin tries to open the door and get out of the car. So Gage sped up a little bit, because he's like, you're not getting out until you give me my money. According to Jonathan, that's what Gage said. Well, then Gage pulled over going down Highway 13. And Jonathan says, quote, pulled over by B-dubs right there, right by the ditch. The kid ran down the ditch, and Gage ran down there and tackled him and got the money back, and I guess scuffled around or whatever they were doing. Like you said, you'll figure it out when you see him or whatever. Gage said he seen the cops, and old boy took off running, and he went up there and talked to the cop, and end quote. First, let me say, I think it's interesting that Jonathan says, you'll know when you see him. And he's talking about Pravin. You'll know what kind of argument, what kind of scuffle they got into when you see him. He doesn't say when you find him or when he turns up. So that's interesting kind of phraseology. And this conversation about money that Pravin allegedly stole from Gage, this will be something that comes up again. Before we even talk about Gage's interview, his first interview, I want to say before I forget, because there's so many details in this case, I think I'm going to leave things out, and I get nervous about that. But in Gage's first interview, the police asked him about this money as well, and he said, I didn't have any money in the car. Like, I just didn't have any money. I think he said he spent his last $10 on gas. And he didn't see money in his car that night. And he also explicitly says that Pravin didn't steal anything from him. So once again, this just isn't adding up. It's not making sense. And you think that the police would be the first people to notice that these two gentlemen don't have the same story. But they didn't seem to find it concerning. Jonathan goes on to describe Pravin. From what Gage told him Pravin looked like, obviously. He said that he was light-skinned, he wasn't very tall, but he wasn't a skinny person either. He was a cut-up kind of kid. I think that he means he was like muscular. Gage had mentioned that maybe Pravin had been Mexican or Filipino or something like that. So this is Jonathan Stanley describing the fight or the scuffle between Gage and Pravin. Now remember, this is a young man who was not present, allegedly, at the time of this interaction between Gage and Pravin. What he's telling the police is what he's been told by Gage, allegedly. When the detective asked Jonathan, how did Gage describe this fight to you? Jonathan Stanley responded, quote, said he ran down the hill and he swung and hit him. He didn't really know if his arm hit him or if he actually connected or what. And I guess they both, from him running down the speed, and I guess they both pretty well collided. The bottom line, even if he hit him afterwards and they both tumbled down, and I guess he got on top of him, and I don't really know if he threw a punch or 100 punches, but he got his money, I guess. I don't know. I didn't ask him if he ripped it out of his pocket or if he still had it in his hand running with him. And then all of a sudden, the cops showed up. The police ask if Gage is known to be a violent person, and Jonathan says no. The police ask if Gage was known to get into fights. Jonathan responded, I mean, the typical stuff growing up. When the police ask Jonathan Stanley, quote, did Gage say anything about, like, what condition this guy was in physically after the fight, end quote, Jonathan Stanley responds, I mean, nah. He just said that he was running, but he wasn't. He didn't know if it was him limping from maybe falling down the hill or what. He just said he wasn't moving. He said he didn't know if he was just slow or if just how he was. Jonathan Stanley goes on to say, quote, he said he wasn't like crawling on the ground or nothing, but he was just looked like he kind of had a little limp. Now later, when Gage is interviewed the same day, he says, no, Pravin didn't have a limp. He was running away. I didn't see him running away. I just felt him get off of me and then run away, but he didn't seem to be running with a limp. He didn't seem to be injured. I only got one good hit in, one good connect. So before we dive into Gage's interview, I want to actually go over the night in question and what we know based on eyewitnesses and cell phone records, evidence. And when I say cell phone records, I mean Pravin's cell phone records, because the police never took Gage or Jonathan's cell phones. They never contacted their cell phone service providers to see who Gage and Jonathan were talking to that night, where they were, what location they were in, at what time of the night, what they were saying to other people that night. They didn't do any of that. But they went through Pravin's cell phone records with a fine-tooth comb until it came to actually finding him, right? So they were able to figure out where he was every step of the way that night until he went missing, even though his phone was still on. They couldn't find him. But I'm sure there's a completely logical explanation for that. So if you remember, Pravin went to a party on College Street that night. This was not the same party or the same house that Gage and Jonathan and their friends were at. Pravin was at 606 College. Gage was at 405 College. Same road, though. Pravin's cousin Ashley and their friend Nate left around 10:45 to get to their shifts at Styx. Pravin and the others were supposed to follow shortly after. Everyone else showed up at Styx except for Pravin. So what happened to Pravin? The narrative of law enforcement, including the then state's attorney, Michael Carr, was that Pravin was incredibly drunk that night, and based on his cell phone records, he left his party at around 11:30. Now, this information is coming from police records as well as a statement written by Michael Carr in February of 2015. Now, keep in mind, this statement, was written after the toxicology report came back, showing that Pravin had no alcohol in his system. This letter came out after the police had cell phone records that showed Pravin did not use his phone between 11:57 p.m. and 12:29 a.m. that night. Yet, Michael Carr spends a lot of time talking about how drunk Pravin was, stating, quote, numerous witnesses, including his friends, a relative, complete strangers, and his own texts suggest that Verghese was intoxicated when he left the party at 606 West College. Sometime just before 11:30 p.m., witness statements indicate that he was intoxicated at the party at 405 West College, where his Facebook GPS records show he was until at least 11:53 p.m. on February 12, 2014. According to interviews conducted by the police conservatively, Verghese had consumed during this evening at least 2 Four Locos, each with an alcohol volume equivalent to 4 or 5 beers, 2 shots of Admiral Nelson's rum, a beer from a refrigerator at the party, and a beer used to prop open a window. It is unknown how many beers he may have consumed in addition to these drinks while he was at the beer pong table just before leaving. According to a resident at 606 West College, Verghese was playing beer pong in the living room at about 11 p.m. when he noticed that Verghese was intoxicated because he was slurring his speech, end quote. Now there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, 405 College was the house that Gage was at, right? Which police and Michael Carr are now claiming that Pravin was also at after he left 606 College. And this has never really been settled on. Some people say he was there. Some people say they saw him there. Other people report that they were there all night and they did not see him.
I have spoken to several people at the party. A few of them said they never saw him. A few of them said he was absolutely there for a few minutes, just coming in to check it out and leave, which after 7 years of studying Pravin and who he was, I can't imagine him doing that. But sometimes I go left when I usually go right. So I can't say he wasn't. Conflicting evidence and conflicting stories, whether or not he stepped foot in that party that Gage Bethune was at that night. We know because of his cell phone ping, he walked right in front of that house because there was a ping at one point in time, literally right in front of that address, but conflicting stories as to whether or not he went into that particular house party on Party Row on his way to the bar they were all going to hang out at night. Remember, everything's within a 4 blocks. Here's the bar, here's where Pravin was, here's where Gage was. 4 blocks. The prosecutor, David Robinson, wanted to mention or bring up some things that they were told by, I believe, the owner of the home. And the owner of the home had said that Gage and what ended up being the tipster were trying to break in cars that night, going around jiggling, and this was the term that was so controversial in court, jiggling car handle doors to see if they were unlocked because they needed money for some coke. The home that Mr. Bethune was at that night has long time been rumored to be the coke house of Carbondale. So I had heard from a very reliable source that Gage and tipster cousin were wanting coke, and they didn't have enough money for the coke. So they're trying to round up some money for the coke and jiggling car handle doors. The owner of the house allegedly told him, hey, I've got a lot of underage people here already partying. I don't need you idiots outside jiggling the car door handles looking for free money to buy cocaine. That was going to be admitted into court to show, he was into some little stuff that night. But I don't know if it was the terminology jiggling car handle doors or what. But the judge did not allow that particular tidbit of evidence, which was on record from the grand jury, into the courtroom. So there are several things that weren't allowed into the trial that we know that were stated by the owner of the home that Gage Bethune was at that night. So, hey, here's somebody, some people think, they're looking for money. They need whatever. Here comes this guy. He looks like he might have something. Let's see what he's got.
But apparently the police were able to pinpoint his exact location to this house using his Facebook GPS coordinates, which sounds super helpful, right? And also kind of creepy that Facebook does that. But it does lead to the question of why they were unable to find Pravin until 5 days after he went missing. Because if you remember, Ashley was calling Pravin the next morning. And for a while, the cell phone rang, and then it eventually went to voicemail several hours later, meaning the battery had died. Pravin's phone was found with him in the woods. It was just a couple feet away from his body. That means that when he went into those woods, his cell phone was on and still transmitting a signal. Now, according to the police, it was just too difficult to find out the exact location where Pravin was because the phone was pinging off more than one tower and they couldn't narrow it down. But I find it very interesting that they were able to use this same data to pinpoint the exact house he was at earlier that night, even though he spent most of his evening at another house on the same street. We've been told multiple times by law enforcement it's impossible using GPS coordinates to figure out exactly where that person was, right? You can get an idea of where they were. And since he was at a party on the same street, wouldn't his cell phone have pinged off the same tower unless Facebook GPS works that much differently? But if it does work that much differently, why couldn't they use it to pinpoint his exact location when he was missing? Just please, if somebody knows the answer, please tell me in the comments. I mean, it's really interesting when technology works sometimes, but not others. And this whole paragraph in Michael Carr's statement, it's just about how much Pravin had to drink, right? He was allegedly very intoxicated just an hour before he entered the woods where he would later be found dead. And his toxicology report during his autopsy showed that he had no alcohol in his system. Is that medically possible? Is that scientifically possible? I don't know, but it sounds pretty hard to believe. I think you need some time, right, to metabolize alcohol through your system. Nothing speeds it up. Not, throwing yourself in a cold shower, not drinking coffee. Nothing really speeds up your body's ability to process alcohol quicker. And it takes several hours, especially considering like how drunk they say Pravin was. I used to go to parties and get drunk all the time, especially in college, and if I drank as much as they're claiming Pravin drank, I would have still been leaking alcohol from my pores for a good 42 hours afterwards. And I repeat, it blows my mind that Michael Carr and the police stuck to this he was drunk narrative, even after the toxicology report showed in black and white that he was not. Ashley told me that he didn't really believe Pravin had anything to drink that night because he did have an exam the next morning, early in the morning. And yes, Pravin was playing beer pong, but Ashley said, everybody plays beer pong with the water in the cups. Like nobody's drinking beer out of the cups that the beer pong ball is going into. So it doesn't really matter like how many cups or how many balls he sank into cups. He wasn't going and drinking all of the beer that was on the table. He'd just sip out of whatever his own beer was. Like that's how you play beer pong. If anybody's playing beer pong where you're throwing the ball in that's been all over the floor and in everybody's hands and you're drinking the beer after the ball's been in there, you need to reevaluate a lot of things. So Ashley doesn't believe that Pravin had much to drink that night at all. And according to his autopsy and his toxicology, apparently whatever he had to drink had been much earlier in the evening because it had already, kind of disappeared from his system. At some point after leaving the original party and possibly stopping in at the other party, the one that Gage was at, Pravin approached a young man who was sitting in his parked car. And the car was parked in a parking lot that was across the street from 405 College, which was Gage's party. What I believe, what Pravin's family believes, what anyone with a brain believes is that Pravin had left the party to walk to Styx. It was just, a couple blocks away from the party. They'd already walked from the area of Styx to the party, but it had gotten much colder and he was only wearing a t-shirt. So about halfway to Styx, which would have been right about at the 405 College area, Pravin was getting cold. So he approached this car and he asked this young man in the car for a ride to Styx. The guy in the car was like, I really wish I could help you out. It's freezing out. I wish I could drive you down there, but I'm waiting on some friends and, we're going to have a full car when they get here. So I'm sorry about that. This guy said Pravin did not seem drunk. He was polite. They exchanged pleasant words. They fist bumped each other and Pravin kept walking. Now, as was per usual for Pravin, being the social person he was active on his cell phone all night. But then there's this period where there's no activity on his phone at all. So all night at the party and before he's tweeting, texting, making calls, checking voicemail. But then between 11:58 and 12:29, there's nothing. And evidently this was when Pravin was with Gage Bethune. Gage claimed that he himself was in his car outside the party after he told Jonathan and his friends that he was going home, and Pravin walked up and asked him for a ride. Now, I'm going to let Gage explain this to you in his own words from his police interview, which was kindly supplied to me by Monica and Lovely.
I'm just going to take you back to the evening of last Wednesday, February 12th. This is the night that we've been talking about here. And I understand that you came to Carbondale that night, but why don't you start with how you got here, what you drove, and who you came with?
Okay. Drove my own vehicle, 2003 Dodge Ram 1500. Drove with my cousin Jonathan Stanley. Just drove to Carbondale. That's how we got there. I drove my truck there.
Okay. And was anybody else with you guys?
Jonathan Stanley.
Just Jonathan?
Yeah.
Was anybody else in the truck with you?
No, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so he says he drove his own vehicle with his cousin. No one else was with them. It was just Jonathan and Gage. So at this point, the police have already talked to Jonathan, and they know someone is lying because Jonathan said that he drove. Gage said that he drove. Not only that, Jonathan said they were with two other people, and Gage said they weren't. It was just him and Jonathan. This is the first question that they're asking Gage, essentially. Right? Like after the what's your name, what's your birth date, where do you live, etc. This is the first real question. and there's already inconsistencies. So 2 of the kids that had left Frankfurt that night with Gage and Jonathan, they were brothers, Dylan and Brandon Cheney, and their nicknames were Pickle. So Dylan was Pickle and Bam was Brandon. So Brandon said that he'd been with them that night as well. But before they even left Frankfurt, he wanted to get out of the car because he said Gage was too effed up to drive, and he did get out. Now, I get the idea that this was not alcohol that Gage was messed up on, but possibly pills such as Xanax. But this is just local hearsay. People who know him have said this, so I'm going to go ahead and say allegedly, right, just to be safe. Allegedly, Gage may have been taking Xanax that night. What is not hearsay is that Brandon got out of the car because he didn't want to drive with Gage due to his condition, and he testified to this at trial. So I guess my point is someone's lying here, and if it's Gage, he's lying to the police within 5 minutes of the interview starting. Yet the police seem to find it hard that Gage would lie about these little things, but not lie to them about other things, far more important things, such as what the hell happened to Pravin and how he ended up dead in the woods when Gage was the last person to see him.
So what was the point of coming to Carbondale that night?
Oh, let's have a good time. That's what they said. Like I said, I was, sick night before. Had a little bit too much to drink. And I said, that was the only ride. So I said, yeah, we can go over there.
Okay. So where did you go in Carbondale?
College Street.
College Street, okay.
Yes, sir.
So you guys went there, I guess, was there a party being held at that house?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if it was for any particular reason?
No, sir.
Okay. Whose idea, I guess, or who became aware of this party?
I think it was just kind of thrown out there on Facebook, and maybe he ran across and said, hey, there's a party in Carbondale. Just go check it out. I don't know if it's on Facebook or where you seen it at.
Okay.
Maybe he got a phone call from somebody else. I don't really know the exact detail on how he found out about the party.
Okay.
Now, in Jonathan's interview, he told police they were going to Carbondale for the birthday party of a friend, Sarah. Gage told the police that the party was for no particular reason as far as he knew. And this could be just a miscommunication. I mean, Jonathan was not clear about how they found out about the party. He said it was Sarah's party, but then he said some guys told them about it when they were in Carbondale.
We're here to talk about an individual that you came across that night,
Yes,
a
sir.
young male. I don't think you know his name.
No, I don't.
Okay. So tell us how you first came into contact with him.
I was leaving the party,
Okay.
and he came up to my window and said, hey, give me a ride. And I said, where are you going? He said, right down the road. So I said, okay, go ahead, get in. It's cold outside. Nobody needs to be walking when it's cold. I offered the main ride. Driving along, right here, make a left here, right here. 30 minutes goes by, yada, yada, yada. Talking on the phone to his friends about some cocaine, whatever it was. He was hyped up a little bit. Just driving. I tell him, I said, asked him multiple times, where are you going? Where's your destination? He can't really give me the exact spot. I don't know if he didn't know where he was going or was just trying to hang out with I don't know what he was doing, but I told him, look, I got to go. And he wasn't cooperating. I made my right. And then I think that's when he realized, hey, I'm getting taken away from my place. And that's when he started to rage a little bit. And it's when he punched me in my eye and I pulled over on the side of the road. Like, that's enough. Can't have that. And he would not get out of my truck. Every time I told him, hey, dude, just go ahead and get out. I have to go home. I don't have any gas. Look up my little gas thing. I don't have any gas. I can't be driving around. I gotta make it back home. Still nothing. Couldn't really tell me where. Couldn't tell you where he's going. So I just pulled over on the side of the highway right there after he hit me in my face and figured I'd get out. I have to get him out some type of way. So he gets out. He swings on me. I back up. I hit him one time. He kind of stumbles, grabs my hoodie, pulls me with him. We roll down the hill a little bit. Like I said, a couple hits were exchanged on the way. He was on top of me at one point, and I was on top of him at one point. Never once fight maybe lasted 30 seconds. I wouldn't even really call it a fight. A little scuffle, We just rolled around. That's when the cop showed up. He asked me what happened, and I told him pretty much got hijacked. Guy wouldn't get out of my car. He got up. He took off running in these woods right here. He's right here, and he said, "Are you sure he's right here?" I said, "Yes, sir. He's right here in these woods. He just now got up and ran." So he stood there and he looked for a little bit, and he asked me if I'd been drinking. Like I said, no, but I had been. I had a little bit to drink that night, and he took my ID from me, looked in the woods for a minute, brought it back to me, told me I was free to go, and drove off. I don't know if he stood around and looked for the criminal. You're hijacking somebody's vehicle. They ask you to get out. If that was me, I'd have hopped out no matter where I was at, if I had to walk 2 miles, I would have hopped out if that person did not want me in their vehicle.
So it's a fight, right? Well, not really a fight. It's a scuffle that lasted maybe 30 seconds, and it included both Pravin and Gage swinging at each other, but Pravin swung at Gage first, so it's self-defense, right? And then they start rolling down the hill off the highway until Gage sees the light of a police car, and he runs back to the road because he's a good boy. He's a good law-abiding citizen. He's a rule follower, you know? And he goes towards the direction of the police car lights, but Pravin runs further into the woods. Now, this was the vehicle of State Trooper Christopher Martin, and according to his report, he was driving down the road when he saw a truck pulled off to the side with its flashers on. So he stopped to offer assistance, see if everything was okay, and this was around 12:10 in the morning. According to State Trooper Martin, Gage approached him, and once again, I was lucky enough to receive the video from Martin's dash cam, and Gage told him a completely different story than he would later tell the Carbondale police. Gage said that he'd been driving along when a black man tried to carjack him and rob him, so they got into a little fight, and then the black man ran into the woods. Now, what you can also see in this video is that Gage's truck is on and running when Martin pulls up, even though Gage specifically says in his police interview that when he stopped the truck, he took the keys out and put them in his pocket so that his unhinged passenger Pravin wouldn't steal his truck.
And he started to get very, very just like, I'm not like I'm going to kill you violent, but he was, screaming at me, cussing at me, and he hit me, and then I pulled over and put it in park, took my keys out so he couldn't take my vehicle. Took my keys out and I put them in my pocket.
Trooper Martin spoke to Gage for a couple minutes. He said it seemed as if Gage didn't know his passenger. He sort of scanned the woods with his flashlight, but nobody went into the woods. They didn't look for Pravin or this, mysterious black man who just runs down the road carjacking people. And after this, Trooper Martin resumed his duties for the evening and never reported the matter to Carbondale police. Gage even admits that Trooper Martin asked if he had been drinking alcohol, and even though he had been, he lied to the state trooper because he was afraid of getting a DWI.
A lot of people want to blame the state trooper because they say, well, he told him he was in the woods. He should have found him. Well, listen, we know what we know. Hindsight's 20/20. We know Pravin was in the woods now. We know he was injured. We know he didn't make it. This police officer is in a college town. And in the college town, you get a lot of college kids drinking a lot of beer and doing a lot of weird stuff. He pulled over because he saw flashing lights. Gage, a few seconds after he got there, walks up from this embankment, hands in his pocket, approaches the cop. How many people that don't look like Gage get to approach the cop behind the camera with their hands in their pocket? First of all, not many that I know anyway. They chat for a second. He sent Gage back to his truck. Well, because of the police officer's report and his testimony at trial that we got to hear, he said it was 12 whatever a.m. I saw flashing lights. I stopped for a motorist assist. The kid did seem nervous. He didn't have anything out of the ordinary harmed on him. He said that he had just picked up a black hitchhiker right here on this road, and that he had opened his wallet and said, hey, I don't have any money. I'll take you wherever you want to go, but you got to give me some gas money. And the black man struck him and tried to rob him, and he ran in the woods. And he said the story was weird, but I asked him if he wanted to press charges, and he said no. And I did notice, I think he said like maybe a red mark on his nose, but it was also 19 friggin' degrees, and he could have just been sitting there peeing and got cold. And so he said that's why I did look and look. He didn't go into the woods. He didn't feel like he should. He thought the story was bullshit and the guy was making it up. And the guy said he didn't want to press charges.
And here's the kicker. Gage Bethune says the quiet part out loud.
It was like he was overruling me. I was scared for my life.
Sure.
I didn't know what he was capable of.
Okay.
Definitely wasn't my race. I ain't used to being around. I grew up in Over. I'm not used to being around that type of population, those type of people. I wasn't used to any of it.
I'm not used to being around that type of population. He definitely wasn't my race. I didn't know what he was capable of. And as he's describing Pravin to the police, he's not really consistent with what his impression of Pravin was. Gage says that Pravin seemed to be a well-rounded kid, a decent, clean person, but then he also says, he doesn't know what Pravin would have done because he wasn't Gage's race. So you can never tell with people that are different than you what they're capable of, what they're going to do.
He seemed like he was a well-rounded kid, pretty clean, Didn't seem like a gangbanger really, but he looked like he might have use drugs. You know, a typical, I guess he was in college. I didn't know his age at the time. I guess a typical college student.
Okay.
I just remember his earrings. I remember he was a darker skin, and it was dark in my truck, so I'd never really got a good shot of his face. But when I seen that picture, I knew it was him.
He's afraid for his life. He's afraid for his life. He's just trying to be a good guy. He's trying to help. He's a good person. He wants the police to know he's a good person. He would help anybody, but I guess you just can't do that in some parts of town, he says.
We're simply trying to help a guy out when it's cold out. Being the tip, you know, I'm a nice guy. I help just about anybody I see. If I see an old woman standing on the side of the road, the bag full of groceries, I'm gonna help her out. That's just me. But I guess you can't do that in certain areas.
And then he says he did hit Pravin. You know, he did hit him, but it was in self-defense. So he's a good person, but he's gonna, you know, defend himself when he has to.
So we turned back off the main road, and that's when we was towards the end of Carbondale. So I figured maybe he's got a place to go. No, we still drove around. Like I said, it was probably at least a 30-minute thing. Driving around. Finally, we're at the edge of Carbondale. I said, dude, I got to go. Get out. He did not want to get out, so I was going to take him with me. You know, maybe I could have somebody else help me get him out.
Okay.
Maybe I could drive to another town, stop at a gas station, go in and say, hey, this guy won't get out of my vehicle. You can call the cops.
Okay.
But at the time, my phone was dead. You know, I sure wasn't going to let him use my phone. I didn't know the guy. I just was trying to get him where he needed to go. Because he seemed like a decent, clean person, like I said. Nobody that was going to harm me. Nobody that was going to have a gun and try to, you know, kill me. It wasn't wearing his hood, wasn't, you know, gangbang walk, none of that. So I thought he was a normal guy.
Then Gage says to the police that Pravin was on his phone the majority of the time trying to get cocaine off of somebody. And according to Gage, at this point, when he heard Pravin on his phone trying to get cocaine, this is when he realized that he was in a vehicle with someone he shouldn't be in a vehicle with.
When he was on the phone the majority of the time.
Okay.
Trying to get cocaine off somebody.
Okay.
And that's when I knew right then, hey, I'm in the vehicle with somebody I don't need to be in the vehicle with. So that's when I was like, okay, dude, I gotta go. I need to be home. I'm running low on gas. We've been driving around for 30 minutes and you haven't gave me a destination.
Because Gage is a choir boy, apparently. And I say apparently sarcastically because he's not. And we will get into this. But you'll find that Gage has quite a history of drugs, using them, selling them. He's not somebody who would be in the car with somebody who is asking about coke and be like, ooh, what is this about? Oh no. My innocent and naive brain can't even process what he's talking about, but all I know is I should not be in the car with this dangerous drug-dealing individual. He is definitely not the kind of person who would have had that instinct or that initial thought. I feel like his initial thought would have been more like, oh, he wants to get coke. I wonder if I can, go in on this with him. But that's just my opinion. Allegedly, don't come for me. Gage. Okay, so Pravin's in the truck. He's not telling Gage where he needs to go. He's just not even talking to him. He's just on his phone and just completely silent, not answering where he needs to go. So after he asked Pravin several times, where are we going? Gage just decided to drive home. And at that point, he claims Pravin became agitated because Pravin must have realized they were leaving Carbondale. And that's when Pravin got violent. Now remember, the police have Pravin's cell phone records, and they know that he didn't use his phone for a half an hour between 11:58 and 12:29. And later when they bring this up to Gage, the fact that they know he wasn't on his phone when Gage says he was on his phone, Gage's explanation is that Pravin must have been pretending to be on the phone.
The stop sign. Well, I'd asked him multiple times. Mm-hmm. After we'd done some driving around, I'd asked him just about every stop he's at. Mm-hmm. And he just did not want to get out.
Okay.
He was on the phone with somebody. Maybe Chicago buddies, I don't know. He was talking to somebody about cocaine. I started to get nervous. Mm-hmm. I was already nervous that it was somebody I didn't know. Yeah. And he wasn't giving me... He said right down the road. Hell, we drove for 30 minutes. Clearly he's up to something. So once I started hearing him talk a little bit, I knew, I said, I'm with the wrong person. I got to get him out of my vehicle. So that's when I decided, hey, been in town too long, I'm going to head home. Maybe I can get some help. Okay. Once he seen me was leaving town, he started to get emotional and mad.
Mm-hmm. When you say that, okay, what was he saying?
Where the fuck are we going?
Okay.
Where the fuck, turn the fuck around? Mm-hmm. And I was like, dude, I've told you 10 times to get out of my vehicle now. And then he starts to get aggressive. And then he just gave me a little pop. Just a little pop, which was enough to make me stop and realize, he's talking about cocaine, Drove around for 30 minutes, and now he's put his hands on me.
Okay. Now, when you say a pop, can you describe that?
A jab to the eye.
Okay. So he punched. Do you remember what hand he used by any means?
Left,
Left hand, and he punched in the eye.
right here, in this
Okay.
eye, right around this area.
Okay. And then what happened then?
That's when I pulled over on the side of the interstate, put my truck in park, and I walked down his side to get him out of the vehicle. He got out of the vehicle, swung on me, self-defense. I moved back, dodge it, or you want to say duck, dodge, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then I hit him. Then he started stumbling back, and he grabbed me,
Okay.
and we rolled down the hill. He was on top, I was on top, he was on top, I was on top. Punches were exchanged. He hit me on top of the head, and I know I hit him. Like I said, I know I got one good connect.
Mm-hmm.
Now the rest of them, I don't know if they hit him in the side of the head or there's only a couple punches thrown.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cop rolled up,
Okay.
and I said, "Cops," and I got up, and I walked straight to the police officer.
Okay.
Cause like I said, I was scared for my life. 30 minutes of driving around Carbondale, ain't never drove around Carbondale like that.
Mhm.
Somebody I don't know talking about cocaine with somebody I didn't know who he was talking to.
Sure.
So I told the cop, said he's in these woods somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
He just ran off. I didn't tell him we got in this, a little scuffle.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been drinking. I didn't want to get in no trouble at the time. I was ready to go home. So, of course, I was going to tell the cop, hey, now I haven't been drinking. He just hopped out and he ran
Mhm.
into the woods. We did get in a scuffle.
Okay. When after the scuffle there at the bottom of the hill and he ran away, do you remember how he was running? Did it seem like he was injured?
Oh, no, I didn't pay too much. I heard him take off. Like, I felt him get off and run. I jumped up and I went straight for the police officer. I'm not turning my back to see what this guy's doing after I just was ready to get rid of him. I was not. No, I was ready to go to the police officer.
Okay.
I was scared for my life.
Did
I
he?
was trying to get him off of me.
And I don't even want to talk about the many, many times Gage feels the need to bring up the fact to the police that he's a nice guy, just helpful. How many times he says the word self-defense because he was scared for his life. Self-defense, scared for his life. Scared for his life. Pravin had never been in a fist fight in his life. He weighed like 155 pounds. He was 5'7". And besides that, he was the one who was found dead after their little scuffle. And this scuffle that took place, it apparently left Gage with no injuries, even though Trooper Martin did say that when he saw Gage that night, he had like a small red mark on his nose. But Martin said it was cold that night, so he thought maybe it could just be from that, when your nose gets rosy when you get cold. But Pravin, after this fight, was left with pretty large injuries, right? On his legs, on his body, on his head. And when I say pretty large injury on his head, I'm going to call it a dent again. It looks like a dent. The way Gage describes this fight is like an actual movie. He fell back because we were on a hill and he grabbed me. And as he's doing, he's like grabbing his own shirt to show. And then, Pravin pulled him down the hill because they were at the edge of the hill. And then they were rolling down the hill. He was on top, I was on top. And the story keeps evolving, right? When the detective asked Gage if he or Pravin had any weapons, all of a sudden Gage remembers that, actually Pravin was talking about a knife on the phone with one of his friends during that time when he never even used his phone.
And just for the record here, did you use any weapons?
No, sir.
Any rocks or sticks that were
No,
nearby?
sir. No, sir.
Okay. Did he ever attempt to use any weapons on you?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
He had said something about while we was driving, because he just kept telling me, go here, go there, go here, go there. He was on the phone with one of his buddies and he had said something about a knife.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I never once seen a knife. He never once pulled a knife out on me. But I don't know if he was using that as a scare tactic to
Mhm.
get me to take him where he was going.
Okay.
But he had said something about a knife. But like I said, I don't know if he had a knife. Scare tactic.
Mm-hmm.
When I asked where it was multiple times, being the nice guy that I was, trying to go home,
Mm-hmm.
and yet I took the time out of my day, out of my night, to give somebody else a ride home that I didn't even know.
Mhm.
When I could have shot straight home, had no worries.
Mm-hmm.
Said I wanted to be the nice guy. I didn't want nobody walking me. It was cold.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the temperature was at the time, but I know it was too cold for me to sit there and stand outside of my truck for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I got mad waiting on the person to move their car that was behind me.
When we find him, is there going to be any reason there are other injuries on him
No, sir.
that are man-made, not from animals? I mean,
No, sir.
okay.
No, he'd only been hit in his face. Like
Did
I
you-
said a couple times.
Did you ever see any blood at all? Maybe where you broke skin?
Where I had broke
Mhm.
skin? Yes.
Okay, so you saw blood
Yes.
on him. Okay. Do you remember where you saw it?
Right, on his mouth. I think I busted his lip open.
You remember anywhere else where he would have got some serious injuries?
No. Like, I mean, it wasn't, we was rolling down the hill. I mean, it wasn't no dominant, full power, like, you know, like somebody were to just lay down and I was to jump and hit him in the face. It was never once like that type of hit. The first hit, I did hit him hard. Like I said, it's self-defense. Somebody swings on me, I'd lean back like this to dodge his punch, and I just went with my weight. And I'd hit him. Closed fist, yes.
Just so
Which I know that's it, and I know that's wrong. I know it is wrong to fight. I do understand that. But I felt at the time I was scared for my life. He drove me around. He had said something about a knife, and he had swung on me. I thought there was nobody around that I had. I did not know what the guy was capable of, so I had self-defense. I know how to defend myself. I hit him. And that's all there was to it. I mean, we rolled down the hill. A couple punches exchanged. He hit me in the head. Like I said, hit him inside the face, maybe the back of the head, maybe, you know. I do know for sure the first hit I hit him dead square in his face. I do know that for sure. Like I said, I didn't leave till probably midnight. Right around midnight, maybe 12:30 at the latest, is when I pulled out of that driveway. Because my dad always tells me, he says, son, nothing good happens after midnight. It's exactly true. Every time I've been in trouble, it's been after midnight. You know, so I was trying to take my dad's word for it, and I was ready to go home.
And that's also a strange thing because Gage claims they were driving around Carbondale for 30 minutes and Pravin didn't talk to him. He was just talking on his phone here and there. Other than that, he was quiet. He wouldn't even answer when Gage repeatedly asked him where they were going. Where am I taking you? Now, everyone who knew Pravin doesn't buy this for a minute, and his mother literally said to me that in order for Pravin to be quiet and not talk for 30 minutes, he would have to be dead or asleep because he was so social, so friendly, so interested in other people and learning about them. You could not shut him up for that long. There's also questions about the money, remember, because Trooper Martin had mentioned to the police that he'd seen dollar bills scattered about on the floorboards of Gage's truck, but Gage told the police he had no money. He just spent his last $10 on gas. This is important because what it seemed did actually happen, according to a grand jury later on, is Pravin was the one who got robbed. He was the one who had money stolen from him. And when Gage is asked about money on the floorboards of his vehicle that night, during and after this scuffle with Pravin, this is his response.
And then the police officer, when we talked to him, he mentioned that he saw some money laying around. Do you remember anything about money?
No, man.
Your money, his money?
I put in my last $10 at the gas station.
Okay.
In Carterville to get me home.
So after that, I'm talking about during this altercation, had he taken any of your money?
No, man.
Or had
No, man.
there was no scuffle over?
There was no exchange of
money?
any money. No, man.
Okay. Not exchange, I'm saying, did
No
he take
showing
anything that
money,
he
no.
wasn't supposed to?
No, I had my last $10. I'd spent it on gas at the gas station. He did not take nothing of mine, no.
Okay, got it.
is there any reason why the cop would tell us there were some dollar bills all over your floorboard?
I don't, to be honest, I don't even remember dollar bills being all over my floorboard. I didn't get down on my floorboard and search. If there's dollar bills all over my floorboard, there should still be dollar bills all over my floorboard as we speak.
Okay.
I haven't even cleaned my truck since then, so they could be pushed underneath my seat.
Okay. Would those be yours or his, do you know?
And they would not be mine. They could have been my friends before we went to before we went there. It could have been the person that ride with me. It could have been his money. I don't know. But I never once seen the boy pull any money out of his pocket, show any money in front of my face. I had my last $10 in my back pocket in my wallet to get home on. Because I knew on the way there I didn't have enough gas to make it back fully. So I had $10 to just in case, you know.
Okay.
So that's his first interview. We will talk about the second interview in the next video, but I do want to talk about Lovely and her family getting notified that Pravin was dead. When the police came, they had already talked to both Gage and Jonathan. They already knew all this information, but they didn't reveal any of it. They did not tell Lovely that before her son staggered into the woods in a drunken haze and froze to death, he'd gotten into a physical altercation with another man, a man who's much larger than him, a man who had him on weight and height and everything, a man who'd punched him in the face, who said he'd hit Pravin so hard he'd broken skin and drew blood. Quote, I think I busted his lip open, end quote.
Pravin really wasn't the one that was doing the raging, all that night. Remember, Gage walked up on video unscathed without a mark on him, and Pravin had a beat down so bad he didn't make it out of there alive. So Pravin couldn't ever say that out loud, but the evidence shows that. And I always like to make sure I do remind people of that out loud. Pravin, if Gage stopped, Pravin would have been like a gazelle and ran down the road. He would never have done what Gage said and said, well, he just sat there. So I got out, turned my car off, went around, and just then we fought. No, nobody's going to wait on you to beat their ass. And nobody's, first of all, you're not going to let somebody get in your car because you're such a nice guy and say, where would you like me to go, Stephanie? Well, I don't know. Well, Stephanie, I'm going to drive you around for 30 minutes because you don't know where to go. I'm going to say, girl, we've been 3 blocks and you don't know where you're going to go. Get out. And we know that he consulted attorneys before he went to the police station because he was very well versed. And his dad even says in documents or in court, yeah, I talked to a few attorneys before he talked to the cops. Because he was very strategically saying, in self-defense, I hit him back. I was struck first. I was the good guy. I was the helper.
A man who lied about so many things during his first police interview, who changed his story more than once, who lied to the state trooper about pretty much everything. And they know that he lied about this stuff because they've already spoken to Jonathan, Gage's cousin, and Trooper Martin. Trooper Martin is the one who brought them to the place, which led them to Pravin's body. After the families notified that Pravin was found dead, the coroner entered the hotel room, and his name is Dr. Tom Kupfer. I'm going to mess it up because it's a strangely spelled name. And so the Dr. Kupfer, he goes through this whole thing. I'm sorry for your loss. We obviously need to do an autopsy, but we don't have a pathologist here, so we have to bring one in. It may take a few days. Lovely's like, what do you mean it's going to take a few days? Where is this pathologist coming from? Russia? Like, why would it take a few days? Dr. Kupferer said the pathologist needed to come in from Indiana, which wasn't far, right? Lovely told me that Indiana is closer to Carbondale than Chicago is. And she said, get this guy here now. I don't care what it takes. Do what you have to do. Do you need money for his airfare? We'll pay it. Whatever it takes, we'll do it. But our son shouldn't be waiting days to have an autopsy done, and he needs to be laid to rest. Then Pravin's older sister, Priya, she asked the coroner, when will we, the family, be able to see Pravin? And the coroner was like, oh no, you can't see him here. You have to wait until you've decided on a funeral home, and then you can see him there at the funeral home. Now, this did sound bizarre to me because as far as I know, the police usually do bring in a family member to identify a body, even if the body's found with a driver's license or some sort of identification on it. And there's many reasons for that. He could have somebody else's identification on him. You just don't know for sure until the people who knew the victim best in life say, yes, this is my son, this is my brother, this is my husband. Lovely was told, we've already identified Pravin. We don't need you to do that. And this is protocol in Jackson County. So there's no reason for the family to come in and see him. And Lovely really stuck to her guns here, and it was tough for her. She explained culturally, being born in a different country that has different systems and processes and beliefs, she was, told to obey law enforcement and listen to them, let them do their job. Not only that, but she had a strong accent, obviously. Her English was broken. She had always thought that you should just follow whatever the police say and don't question them. So maybe these law enforcement officials saw her as someone who was going to be easy to push around, somebody who's going to be kind of meek, mild, and not speak out, not stand up for herself. But she wasn't somebody to push around, and she told them that no one was touching her son until she got to see him. So when she says this, Dr. Kupferer, he was kind of pissed. He's agitated. He was clearly annoyed at being challenged and having somebody look in his face and say, no, that's not going to happen. What you said's not going to happen. What I say is going to happen because this is my son. So he walked away and he was talking to the police for a few minutes, and then he came back and said, okay, we made arrangements for Pravin's immediate family to view the body. Only Pravin's immediate family. So they go to the hospital, and the family's told to wait in the chapel while they prepare Pravin's body for viewing. And many other family members, friends, and supporters who were already in Carbondale, they came to show their support and wait with the family in the chapel. And then the coroner came out, Dr. Kupferer, he came out, and he invited them all back to the GI lab. And when I say all, I mean everyone in the chapel. And Lovely said the chapel had been full of people there for Pravin, standing room only. What you don't know is earlier when Lovely had to kind of fight to view her son's body, Kupfer had told her, okay, we'll let you see him, but only you and your husband. But then Pravin's sister Priya, who was very close to Pravin, she started crying and she said, I want to see him too. So he begrudgingly allowed Pravin's 2 sisters to attend the viewing of Pravin's body as well. Now he's throwing open the door to, 20 or 30 people. And this is when Lovely is going to see her son for the first time. And all these people are around. The first time after his death that she's seeing him. And the first words out of her mouth when they showed him to her were, who beat my son, because she saw his face. She saw the dent and the bruise on his head. She saw the bruises and the scratches all over his body. And she knew this was no accident. This was not something that he did to himself. Now, this video has gone on for a while, but we've barely just scratched the surface, and we will go over a lot more in part 2. In part 2, we're going to talk about the autopsy and the second autopsy that Pravin's family went out and got done themselves, and how drastically different they were. We're going to talk about Gage and his second interview, and we're also going to talk about how hard Lovely had to fight in order to get anybody to take her son's case seriously. But when she finally did, things started to move pretty quickly. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys so much for being here. If you want more information about this, there is a documentary on Discovery Plus right now. I believe it's called Who Killed My Son? And this is the documentary I saw, which prompted me to reach out to Lovely. And then Lovely got me hooked up with Monica and Ashley, and they've just been great. So if you want to kind of just get some info, you can watch that on Discovery Plus. It's not an ad, it's not sponsored. But I will tell you that once I watched the documentary, I was very taken in by it and like, whoa, this is a case I have to cover. But once I started talking to Lovely, and she has all the police reports, right? Everything unredacted. Once I started talking to her, once I started getting these things in my hands and looking at them, I realized that it's so much worse and more multifaceted than that hour-and-a-half documentary could have even touched on. And it's not their fault, you know. They don't have the freedom of YouTube where I can make as many videos as I want and make them as long as I want to get the whole story out. But I highly encourage you guys to check that out if you want, and also come back for part 2 so we can keep diving in. Thank you so much for being here. Stay kind, stay beautiful, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Bottle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly, and so you got to let it go. I got blood.